Shamana maneke vele katila. Ikoti vili mini katine meneke late. Epandoglos kivili katila. Makos katande groses. Ile resese. Avantos kapelika. Makwate debreke kelaga. Esa debreka vala katile kelate. Hosea chapter 6, the verse number 2. After 2 days will he revive us. In the third day he will raise us up, and we shall live in his sight. A generation must emerge. A generation that understands the counsel of God. A generation that understands the processes in the kingdom and no shortcuts. A generation that understands the principles of waiting on the Lord. A generation that has mastered the ways of the Lord. A generation of the overcomers. A generation that understands the language of scars. A generation that can reveal Christ the way he is. A generation that can bear the burden and the weight of the kingdom. A generation that can perceive the heartbeat of the Father. A generation must arise. Captains must be born. A generation that understands the burden of fellowship. A generation that understands the need to draw strength from the secret place. A generation that understands the intelligence of the divine. A generation that can legislate counsel of God and shut down the kingdom of darkness, advancing frontiers. A generation of power, a generation of fire. Such generation must arise. A generation who fears nothing but sin and desire nothing but God. A generation of pace setters and trailblazers. A generation who will strive at nothing but loving God. A generation who will hate self by the emergence of God's nature in them. A generation of God chasers and God catchers. A generation who will not lose their vision at the cost of sleeping on a woman's lap. A generation who will stay focused on the purpose of their living. A generation full of extreme hunger and passion for the presence and manifestations of the supernatural. Oh, the generation of Papa Abraham and Noah, who were noted for extreme faith demonstrations. A generation of the Joshuas and Calebs who preach better reports about the kingdom of God. A generation of the Enoch, Samuel, Elijah, and the Davids who will take an extreme walk with God, demonstrating his fire. The generation of the Davids who will not feel ashamed of their wrongdoings, approaching God with the heart for mercy and grace. A generation of the Daniels and Ezra's who will revisit prophecies. A generation of the Nehemiahs who will not rest until the walls of the kingdom is rebuilt, shutting the mount of Sanballat and Tobiah. A generation who will cry out loud and say, "Here I am, send me, send me." A generation who will labor unspent and be spent. A generation who will offer themselves as a drink offering ready to be poured on the altar. A generation like the prophetess Anna who will not stop interceding, enforcing and reinforcing the will of God to stand. A generation who will burst out with love and respond to the command, "Feed my lambs." A generation who will descend into the street and feed the poor Lazarus, the widows, the mentally incapable, the disabled, giving them light to see. A generation that will illume the hearts of the needy. A generation who will not rest until lives are changed. A generation who will carry the burdens of God at heart. Where are the men and women of the selfless generation who will care less about themselves, caring more about others? A generation of the Samaritan woman who will say, "I couldn't get satisfaction from one man, neither from 5 men. Send me to Jesus to be married by him." A generation of the Samaritan woman who will say, "I have drunk from my first man. Likewise the 5 but I still thirst. Send me to the well of Jesus, so I may drink of him. A generation of a fearless and a bold heart, who will stand and defend the cause of God in this wicked, perverse, and crazy world. Looking for the men like Sir David Livingston, Williams J. Seymour, Oswald J. Smith, Dwight L. Moody, John Wesley, Billy Graham, John G. Lake, A.W. Tozer, Benson Idahosa, Apostle Babalola, Reinhard Bonnke, John Knox, John Huss, Martin Luther, John Fox, John Calvin, Alexander Dowie, Smith Wigglesworth, Sir William Braham, A.A. Allen, James McKeown, Apostle Elim, just to mention a few who stir up even the fire in this generation. We are looking forward for the emergence of the creative men and the creative women who will carry the cause of God even on their shoulders.